All right, folks, so we're just here today to talk about philosophical influences, those three philosophers that had an impact on the founders and what they thought about government. So you've had a chance to dig around and come to an understanding of the three, and now I'm just here to kind of clarify and make sure you have the information that you need to have for the upcoming assessment. So we had three philosophers that we looked at: Thomas Hobbes, John Locke, and Jean-Jacques Rousseau. Now, they're all somewhat associated with a period of time that we call the Enlightenment. So the Enlightenment was a period of time from the late 1600s into the 1800s. And it was a period of time when philosophers and people really started to question traditional authority. So they're looking at the basis for legitimate government. And they're starting to question whether it should be based on bloodline, whether it should be based on religion. And they're moving towards an idea that really, you know what, maybe legitimately governmental power comes from the people. So Thomas Hobbes was the first to make the shift. We probably talk about him more as a pre-Enlightenment philosopher because he didn't really move too far in his thinking. He was English. His major political work was called The Leviathan. It was published in 1651. The other philosopher that we look at is John Locke, also English. He published a book called Two Treatises of Government in 1689. It's really the second treatise that we focus on. And finally, our last philosopher was Jean-Jacques Rousseau. He was Swiss. He published a book called The Social Contract in 1762. Now, all three had an impact on the thinking of the founders. So the first question you were to explore is, what did they say about human nature? And this was an important question because based on their answer, it informed the reason why government was necessary. So Thomas Hobbes theorized that in a state of nature, in a state of anarchy, where there is no government, that people were inherently selfish. They were seeking the good life, they were seeking the good stuff, and they would take it from you if they could. You can't change human nature. So when he's answering the question, why is government necessary? Everybody remains selfish. They're always going to be selfish. Now, John Locke disagreed with Thomas Hobbes. He said, you know what? People are self-interested. They're interested in self-preservation, but they make rational decisions. They're not necessarily selfish. They just make decisions that are good for them, that are right for them. Now, in the state of nature, he also talked about people being equal, that they had natural rights, the right to life, liberty, and property, and everybody had that right. Okay, now that was in a state of nature. He's going to back away from that once we're in a state of community or whether there's a state of government. He also said people are independent, that they think differently about things, and that's what brings people into conflict. Now, Rousseau, on the other hand, he's the philosopher that we highlighted on the very first day of class. He said people are inherently good, kind, and compassionate. They're not the enemy of their own kind. Rousseau's the guy that would say, hey, if you see a baby about to fall into a well, everybody's going to reach out and be concerned. That he's the one that where we ask, if all men are angels, why is government necessary? And we answered that question on the first day of class. If you were an EVA student, it was Ben and Ashley. Okay. If you were in class face to face, there was the naked dancer and there was the speedy driver. And they were both good, kind, compassionate people. But when they had freedom to just live their lives the way they wanted to, they unfortunately impacted and harmed each other. Okay. All right. So let's move on to the next question. Why is government necessary? So Hobbes, again, he says people are inherently selfish, right? So on their day-to-day lives, they're going to be trying to steal from each other. And if that brings them into conflict, they might ultimately kill each other trying to satisfy their selfish desires. So government's necessary to provide order, to provide rules, because I can't change people from being selfish. But what I can do is give them rules to follow so that they never come into conflict with each other. Because I'm going to follow the rules that I know if the penalty is going to be that I'm put to death if I don't follow the rules, right? So government provides order, provides rules. Now for John Locke, he thinks about it a little differently. Now everybody has the right to life, liberty, and property. And the law of nature, reason, tells me that I don't have the right to take that from anybody, right? That what's your stuff is your stuff, and what's my stuff is my stuff. We're not going to steal from each other. That's not a rational choice. However, we are independent and we do think differently. So what you think is yours, I might actually think is mine, and that brings us into conflict. And in a state of nature, there's no independent enforcer, there's no independent judiciary to mediate that conflict and say, no, Mr. Doctor, you're wrong. That actually is somebody else's stuff. Okay, so government is necessary to secure my natural rights, to secure my right to life, my right to freedom, liberty, and my right to my property, my stuff, so that I don't come into conflict with other people. Now, with Rousseau, it's completely different. People are good, kind, and compassionate. They're not going to actually try to harm each other. So again, we're talking about people that when they have complete freedom to do what they want, they unwittingly impact each other. And again, we saw that on the first day of class with our speedy driver and our dancer of unfortunate ways, right? They just wanted to drive and they just wanted to dance, but in doing so and exercising that freedom, they harmed each other. Now, if I'm the dancer of unfortunate ways, what happens then is I'm going to have this anxiety. I'm not actually going to exercise my freedom because I'm afraid to leave the house. I know that if I leave the house, even though the world is filled with good, kind, compassionate people, they might accidentally harm me. So I'm anxious about that. The only way for me to have true freedom is to give up some of that freedom and enter into a community with other people where there's government, and then I actually will have true freedom because I will be free to leave the house and not worried about, bad things happening to me. Okay. So what form of government is best? Now with Hobbes again, he recognizes that everybody is selfish. So he says an absolute monarchy is the best form of government. It's best to have one selfish person making all the rules. If that selfish person shares power with another person, that other person's going to want more and more power because they're selfish, which brings the two rulers into conflict then. My only job is to provide order, and if there's conflict, there's not order. So an absolute monarchy is the best form of government according to Hobbes. Now with Locke, he's a realist. He says it doesn't matter. The best form of government can be any form of government as long as it secures the rights of majority of the people. That begs the question, what about the minority? What about, does it 51% of the population? Is that fine? What about the other 49% of the population? Do we not have to worry about their right to life, liberty, and property? That's Locke. He's kind of a realist in that regard. Now, with Rousseau, he's actually saying, you know what? The best form of government is the one that maintains equality between the people. Okay, so his best form of government is a direct democracy, because it's the one that actually says everybody has to be equal. And that's going to become more apparent when we talk about the contract itself for Rousseau. Okay. So the contract, all three philosophers talk about government as a contract, but they think about it a little differently. For Hobbes, the contract is between the monarch, the absolute monarch, and the subjects. Note the specific use of the word subjects. Subjects have no rights. So in this case, the people give up all of their freedom to this monarch in order to have order and rules to follow. Okay? And the monarch just provides that. That's their one job. So there's no freedom for the people. There's no rights for the people. He does maintain the one exception. If the monarch fails to provide order, so if there's chaos, if there's anarchy in the street, if I cannot leave the house without there being rules to follow, then the people can get rid of the monarch and replace it with, yes, that's right, a new monarch. Okay? Now with John Locke, he holds out this thing here. Now, the thing with Locke is the contract is between government and the citizens. The citizens do not themselves have a contract with each other. You think of it as each individual citizen has a contract with government to have their rights secure. This is important because it allows the members, the actual citizens, to view each other differently. I can view you as someone better than myself or someone less than myself, right? Because I don't have a contract with you. I only have a contract with government. And as long as government is securing my life, liberty, and property, it's a good government. Once it fails to do so for a majority of the people, then I, as a citizen, have an additional right. I have the right to revolt, and I can get rid of government and replace it with a better form of government that's more likely to secure my life, liberty, and property. Now, with Rousseau, he takes it one step further. So let me go back to Locke for just a second here. Locke was a realist. He was like, governments already exist in the world. So the contract's going to be between an existing government and its citizens. The contract, government existed before the contract, according to Locke. Now, Rousseau, he takes it one step further, one progression further. He's like, no, no, no. The contract has to exist before government. So the contract exists between individuals of the community. And because the contract exists before government, it requires that every member of the community view each other as an equal within that contract. No one is better than anybody else, according to Rousseau. We all have equality within the contract. So once we have the contract and we're going to create a government, the government system has to maintain that equality between the people. And what's the only form of government that maintains the equality of every single member? That's a direct democracy, because everybody's equally participating in the making, the enforcing, and the interpreting of the law. There you go, folks. Now, so before we end here, the question is, which one of these philosophers do you think most influenced the founders? We know that at the founding of the country, not everybody was equal, right? Even though the founding fathers talked about, all men are created equal, did they really believe all men are created equal? And when they said men, did they talk about humanity as a whole, or did they really just mean people of a particular gender? So when you recognize the reality of the times, which philosopher allowed for there to be, dominance of one gender over another, dominance of one racial group over another? Which philosophy allows for that and yet still can talk about the equality of rights and the security of rights being a purpose of government? If you figured out that it's Locke, you're correct. Okay, Locke is going to be the primary influence. Okay, do we wish that it was Rousseau? Maybe. Okay, Hobbes, too early in time, didn't progress far enough. All right, thanks for listening, and hopefully that kind of clears up any kind of misunderstanding you have, having done your own research. And bye.